Hello, and welcome to another episode of Lexicon Late Night. I'm your host, David Norcross, here with my colleague, Justin Sondini.
That's right. Well said.
So today we're going to talk about another comedian. So way back in the first episode, we spoke about Norm Macdonald. And today we're here to talk about Patrice O'Neal.
Another comedian, huh?
Why another comedian?
Well, David, because comedians are quintessential storytellers. Norm, like we mentioned in the first episode, was one of the greatest storytellers of all time. And so was Patrice O'Neal. So it's only fitting that we talk about comedians here. First of all, we're both huge comedy fans. But comedians really personify what storytelling is all about. It's essentially a storytelling art form. So it's appropriate for us to talk about storytellers and comedians as storytellers. But also, the purpose of this show, really what it is for us to have conversations that we would have anyway with no cameras on, and then shoehorn in some lessons about marketing for the audience.
That's the name of the game.
Lexicon Late Night. That's why we got our professional coffees over here.
Yes.
Cheers.
Cheers. So, without further ado, let's get into Patrice O'Neal. So, Patrice O'Neal was, certainly for me, and I know for you too, one of the best comedians of all time.
Yeah, yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm again using the past tense here, as it had to do with Norm, because Patrice died way too young. But his name resonates today, 15 years after his death. He's still strong in the public consciousness, in our consciousness. So what we want to do is understand what was it about Patrice that created that longevity, and what can businesses learn from his techniques that they can apply to their own storytelling.
That's right. What can businesses learn from the late, great Patrice O'Neal?
Indeed. Right. So first up, outreach.
That's right. So in order to demonstrate his brilliance at outreach, we're going to show a clip from the Opie and Anthony show.
That's why I love Jesus so much. Even if you don't believe in him as a deity, as a man,
yeah,
he died. He could have got out of that pain by simply saying, "I do not believe in God."
Yeah, yeah.
But he had so much faith that he took that beating, and I wouldn't take a hard pinch for this human race, man.
William Wallace also laying on that table, getting disemboweled. And all he had to do is kiss that little emblem and say, you know, yeah, the king's the king, I pledge my honor, and they would have just lopped his head off and no more pain.
But he had to go with his guts all over the place.
And you know they were using that big hook thing and just ripping his intestines
and
open.
I would have seen the two sitting there watching me going,
yeah.
That right there was helping me. He killed the mouse.
That's the Irish
and that redheaded that big sucker. I used to roll with his father.
I would not take a hard pinch for this human race.
And
what a line.
The great thing about that is that's just one example. There's almost endless clips like that. Like it would take forever to run out of Patrice clips.
Yeah, I think we should probably explain what the Opie and Anthony show is. It's a long-running radio show that played on terrestrial radio, but also on Sirius XM. This clip, you can tell from our editing out the swearing that it's on Sirius XM. But it was just a brilliant show for comedians to come on. They were kind of like, for those of you who don't know, they're kind of like shock jocks. But they would often have comedians on. And what was great about their format is it was just comedians hanging out and talking like normal people, but they're comedic geniuses. Like they had so many of the top comedians, especially around the New York area at the time. And Patrice was just a perennial kind of guest on the show. And he was always funny, no matter what they were talking about. And oftentimes ranting about movies. And it's just him just talking, but it's just so funny.
Yeah, obviously, as you said, that circle of influence, it was obviously Patrice, but it was people more famous than Patrice too. It was Louis C.K., it was pre-podcast Joe Rogan, it was Dane Cook, it was Bill Burr. It was these people who were already hitting it. And that Opie and Anthony show created that. It's the first kind of podcast, right? The first environment where you can just come and freestyle. There was no agenda, it was just totally freestyle. So Patrice, at that time, he was an up-and-coming comedian. Even though he'd been around for years and years, he didn't yet have the name recognition that he deserved. Like, he was brilliant. But
yeah, I remember one specific episode where Louis and Jim Norton were commiserating about when you have a gig at a theater and the hotel isn't so great. And Patrice is like, you guys are talking about a level, like I'm still doing the Chuckle Hut and I've got to stay in the comedian condo. Or no, Louis and Norton were reminiscing about how brutal it was to have to do clubs and stay in these ugly condos and stuff. Now it's so much better. We're doing theaters and we stay in 5-star hotels. And Patrice is like, you guys are reminiscing about the terrible old days that I still live in.
But the genius of him was that he was probably the best of that group even. He just hadn't, for whatever reason, hadn't hit yet. So him being on O&A it's a perfect example of good outreach, right? So if you're a business and you're getting started and you don't yet have the name recognition, you should be looking to get published in places that you're not competing against them, but they've got a platform already. You know, the obvious example is traditional PR, where you get published in a newspaper, but these days it's influencer marketing, it's outreach. So Patrice kind of nailed that idea, right? He was where people were tuning in to listen to Burr and Louis, but when they heard Patrice, they had to go and see Patrice because he was the best.
Yeah, 100%. And so the lesson here for business leaders, I think is a genuine one. You point out that people have shared audiences. Sometimes they're competitors, sometimes they're not. So with the Opie and Anthony guys, they're radio show hosts. They're not competing with Patrice, but they certainly have overlap in the audience.
They can amplify.
Exactly. So it's good for both of them. It's a win-win. They get Patrice on, he's hilarious. They give him better content, and then he gets access to their platform, which is why we always recommend to our clients to go speak at Chamber of Commerce events or hold your own speaking engagements, but invite other guests and create a business community that you can tap into, and then gain access to a wider audience that you wouldn't necessarily have access to.
Absolutely, and it's something we practice. We don't just preach, right? So we had that event at the Landmark recently where we brought together 4 clients. We always try and help our clients to podcast together and amplify together. So O&A wasn't a podcast, but just the nature of it, the clips live forever on YouTube. So I think that leads us on to our next topic pretty nicely.
Yeah, exactly. So because Patrice was so popular on Opie and Anthony, the Opie and Anthony guys actually gave him his own show on Sirius XM, and it was called The Black Phillip Show. And this brings us to our second clip.
It's like you meet, if you're an animal, okay, if you're a great white shark.
Okay.
There's a woman great white sharks and there's men great white sharks.
Yeah.
To every other animal, great white sharks are just vicious. No other animal looks at a great white shark and go, uh-oh, here comes the girl version.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
a lot of men, okay, we go and try to date within our species. Most male great whites say, oh, wow, they go, a girl, oh, I want her.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But women go,
yeah.
I hate the way great whites treat the woman great white.
So, insightful commentary.
Yeah, very profound. Okay, so before we get any complaints from anybody, we're just using this as illustrative material. The thoughts and opinions of Patrice O'Neal do not necessarily reflect those of Lexicon or David Norcross, even though I totally agree with what he's saying here. So there's a lot going on here. I think one thing that we could address is that he kind of marketed himself, at least in this context, for the Black Phillip show as the Oprah for men, which is where Black Phillip comes from, because he's like Black Dr. Phil, but it's for men. So it's relationship advice for men. And he has a very, whether you agree with it or not, very consistent philosophy about dating, about relationships, and ultimately what leads to a successful, healthy relationship. Whether you agree with him or not, he had that consistent philosophy behind everything he did, including his comedy. So that's one thing to really think about.
Absolutely, and the advice for businesses here is long-form longevity. So the Black Phillip show, I think there's only about 15 episodes already.
Right, but they're all like 2-3 hours long.
Yep, and they're all on that same theme. It's. I think I'd never heard anything like it at the time. So as we just saw from that clip, it's very much kind of advice for men. And to be honest, men don't usually get that advice. Like it's kind of taboo a little bit to even talk about these subjects. So he really carved out a niche for himself, a very unique place in the ecosystem. And because of that uniqueness and because it's so long form, there are just endless clips forever. So many people get into Patrice by coming across one of those clips.
Yeah, 100%. I think like we kind of touched on this during the previous clip, but this is pre-podcast era. But this is really the genesis of that style of long-form conversation that's now super popular. So that's what makes his death, again, so much more tragic, is that for sure he would have a massive podcast if he was alive today. But yeah, like you said, people can come across these little clips and they're animated. This isn't obviously how it was presented in its original format, but the animation is great. And people will just come across these and then they're little 1-minute clips. And then I go, okay, well, this is hilarious or this is really insightful. I got to find out more. And then they go see the pillar content, which is, it's all on YouTube now, by the way, but just hours and hours of conversation. So if you get hooked on Patrice, even though he's gone, there's just countless hours of material. And so, yeah, long form longevity. But another thing here for business leaders is you can, long form content is great for creating short form content that's very social media friendly. So another thing that we do for our clients all the time is we have them record a discussion like this one, a podcast, and then we'll select the very best little highlight pieces and then cut those into snippets and share those on social media with a call to action, enticing viewers to go watch the full video.
And if you're watching the snippet right now on LinkedIn, that's what it means.
Exactly. We're getting meta.
Yeah, so I think, as you said, this is pre-podcast, but the format is the same, right? It's that long-form content. It's that insightful content. And I know you can't comment on this, but I think Patrice would have been way bigger than Joe Rogan. Like, he's just, his instincts, his natural, he was pure comedy. Mm-hmm. He had unique insights. He wouldn't have perhaps won over the whole world, but he would have made headlines every day.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I wonder how canceled he would be if he was alive today. Who knows?
That's a good point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can't really run that counterfactual. But Joe Rogan is popular for a reason. And not to go too off track here, but I've seen, there was a New York Times journalist who was like, hey, instead of complaining that Joe Rogan is more popular than us, we should really take a look at ourselves and see why he's getting 10 times the viewers or readers that we are.
Great point. It's those long-form, honest conversations that seemingly are free of political influence.
Mm-hmm. And it goes to another thing that we've spoken about a lot is when people say, oh, people have no attention span these days. That's just simply not true. It's a point you've made many times. If somebody's willing to listen to a 3-hour Joe Rogan podcast, or back in the day, 2.5-hour Black Phillip, or watch hours upon hours of content on Netflix, people don't have short attention spans. They just dismiss things they aren't interested in quickly. Yep. And so that's why you just have to resonate with your audience. You do that by being a guide who's guiding the hero, which is your audience. Not to go too far into this, it's Lexicon Late Night. We're supposed to be having fun. But it is true that if you can grab somebody's attention, then you can hold it for a very long time. You just have to prove to them quickly that you're worthy of their attention.
Exactly, and there's a niche for everything. Like Patrice, probably most of his audience was men, I would imagine. Like
well, you'd be surprised at how many women called in, usually just angry,
that's true.
But then occasionally agreeing with him.
So obviously men and women is a 50-50 split. It's a pretty big audience still. But even if you're the most niche provider of a service, you can still create content for your audience. As you said, not to get too lexicon on this, but hero guide, whatever your industry you're in, you have insight that can help your customers. So tell them that, share your influence, share your ideas, and you win loyalty, you win trust, and you win followers. Because even all these years later, we're still coming back to Patrice because he touched a nerve that resonates with us and will continue to resonate with generations of people to come because there was a universal truth in it.
100%. And this just goes to show, like, I think actually we should probably save this for the next clip because if we're going to talk about messaging and persona and all of these important things, I think they're best illustrated with our next clip from his special. Groundbreaking special, really. One of the best comedy specials of all time. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. But here's a clip from Elephant in the Room.
We're like, I'm trying to like make it so women just like understand a little bit of, like, just to sympathize. It's like we're like sport fishermen. This is what I'm saying. Men like to fish. And sport fishing is different from catching fish for food. You just get it, you catch it, and you show your friends. Because you want them to know that you can catch fish. You take a couple of pictures so you can show people the fish that you have the ability to catch. And then you release it back into the water. But a lot of women in here, you have boyfriends or husbands. You a fish that jump back on the boat and just was like flapping, looking at me like, hi, I was wondering if you're gonna be fishing here again next week. Like, yeah, for other fish, get off my boat. Is that how you treat all the fish? You'd be like, oh, God damn.
I feel like we might get in trouble with this one. You more than me.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. Well,
again, I'll repeat the disclaimer. His views do not represent those of Lexicon.
but a great example of persona, audience, consistent messaging, and that's what we're here today to discuss.
Yeah, 100%. So first of all, he's hilarious, but he's got this very clear persona. You can tell by his attire, his mannerisms, and everything. And he's got consistent messaging, as you saw in the previous clip as well. He's like the Oprah for men, and that really shines through and resonates. And this probably be a good time to explain the quote of his that you mentioned the other day.
Yes. So I might need to read this from my computer. Bear with me a second here. So the idea of comedy, really, is not everybody should be laughing. It should be about 50 people laughing and 50 people horrified.
Yeah. See, just as an amateur stand-up comedian, I just respect the courage of that approach to comedy, because when I'm up there, I'm trying to please 100% everybody. And I fixate on the one person who's not laughing, and I kind of go like, come on, what's your problem? You know, come on, laugh. Everybody else is laughing. What's wrong with you? But he just embraced the fact that some people aren't going to like you. And he relished it, like he thrived in that environment. And one of the things that he did so well, better than maybe anybody, is he would purposely dig himself into a hole and kind of alienate at least half the audience, and oftentimes more, with a premise that was really outrageous. And then he would try to dig his way out of the hole, and then to massive satisfaction. Like, it was so he was such a master of his craft at doing that, like creating a no-win situation, and then just being so good that he wins in the end.
So the lesson here, it's hard to simplify it to one thing, but it's don't pander, it's know your audience, it's consistent messaging, it's so many of the things that we discussed with Norm, to be honest. I feel like we're repeating ourselves a little bit.
Right. Well, consistent messaging.
Yeah. And those really are two examples of very unique comedians. Like, they're not your mainstream guy who is looking for getting everybody to laugh. They both were kind of, I think Norm was more of a performing artist than Patrice was, but Patrice was just so real. And I mean, don't pander is a lesson that we gave to Norm, and it was a positive. And I think it's positive with Patrice's stand-up. Perhaps the funniest comedian I've ever seen, to be honest. Like, both in his specials and on O&A. But there is a downside to that.
Sure. Yeah. So, as we mentioned, he was just starting to break through, which is what it makes the whole thing so much sadder. Like, Elephant in the Room was a pretty big hit, and then who knows what he could have done next. And then unfortunately he died at the age of 41, which is young for anybody, young for a comedian. So he had a lot more to give. But before that, he definitely was talented enough to break through into superstardom. And he didn't. There's a lot of examples of this. Chris Rock, there's an episode of Opie and Anthony where Chris Rock is kind of like haranguing him about how Chris Rock had him in mind, Patrice, to play his father on the TV show Everybody Hates Chris, which would have been a massive career opportunity. But Patrice just kind of didn't care, showed up unprepared, didn't really give much of an audition, whereas Terry Crews came in, knew the script back and forth, knew everything was super nice, super professional, and Chris Rock was like, well, I gotta hire him, even though I wanted Patrice. And so in this Opie and Anthony episode, he kind of tells Patrice, like, there's no reason, like, you're funnier than I am, which goes to show what you were saying. Like, he was in that top tier of funny, but he just never made it because he kind of took that don't pander, always stay true to yourself thing maybe a bit too far.
Yeah, I'd say so. Like, because he was in The Office as a bit part player, he was in Arrested Development as a bit part player, he had many small parts in movies, including with director of Spike Lee. So he annoyed Spike Lee too.
Yeah.
Not pandering. So I think for a comedian, for a performer, for an artist, purity is a wonderful thing. But the business part of it is different. You have to some degree, compromise with the business. You can't be that raw in a negotiation. You have to be a little bit more professional. And I think the lesson here is twofold. It's like embrace Patrice's ownership of his brand on stage, in public. The public persona was amazing, but you have to modulate the private persona a little bit when you're doing business.
Yeah. I agree, at least as far as the advice for business owners. I don't know, like there's just something beautiful about Patrice's story about how he was just like true to himself, never pandered, never really gave a F about anything, just like, I'm here to be funny, this is me, take it or leave it. There's just something really inspirational about that. But as you were saying, for business leaders, for marketers, for brands, you should definitely be, when you're creating content, be like Patrice. Don't pander, know your audience, don't be afraid to alienate certain people, take chances. All of these things, great. But behind the scenes, when you're at the negotiating table, you're gonna have to show a little tact, and you're gonna have to make some compromises. And if you're not willing to do that, then get somebody on your team who is.
Yeah, perhaps whatever you need support with. I mean, probably you need a lawyer for the background stuff, but if you need help crafting that message, building your persona, what should you do?
Yeah, hire us, and we'll make you like Patrice.
Yeah, outsource the Lexicon. So, in closing, if you haven't seen Patrice, check him out. You may be 50% of the people who don't love him. There's a good chance you're going to be 50% of people who do love him, but he is a unique voice. He is an outstanding comedian, and he was, unfortunately, he left us too soon, just like Norm.
Yeah. Rest in peace to both of them. We don't want to end on a depressing note, do we?
No. So what have you got for me?
It's going to be hard to do any quoting of Patrice without swearing. I've been struggling this entire time not to swear. But like David said, just check them out. Like countless hours of brilliant material. It'd be kind of funny if somebody becomes a Patrice fan because of our little podcast here.
I hope they do.
But yeah, I sincerely hope that happens. And at the very least, business leaders out there, take these lessons to heart. So outreach, you can gain a wider audience through outreach. Patrice is a pure example of this. Long-form longevity, produce long content, but then select the best parts for publishing on social media. And finally, stay true to yourself, be consistent with your messaging.
Indeed. Well, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Lexicon Late Night. We'll be back again soon for probably another comedian, but at least one of the storytellers that inspires Justin and I. We'll come back to you with 3 more lessons from the greatest storytellers of our time.